Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 256, Navigating Extrovert Settings. I might as well call this episode Navigating Life, as pretty much every setting we experience is geared up to favour extroverts. Families force their youngsters to be sociable and sometimes even to put on a show for visitors, and all too often we're worried about quieter children. The education system forces even young children into working in groups, but a preference for working alone raises concerns. The workplace from the interview stage onwards favours those who speak up over those who think deeply. Society seems to value celebrity and visibility over contribution and a strong work ethic. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with any of those expectations, provided they are balanced and equitable. And in my experience, they are not yet. So in this episode, I'll be exploring how we quieter, more thoughtful ones maintain our authenticity in the daily settings that challenge us. And given that many of us spend the majority of our time at work, that's where I'll start. I've been in and around corporate workspaces for nearly 50 years now. Crikey, that sounds a little scary when I put it like that. But during those 50 years, I've experienced a lot. Change, bias, repeating cycles, reinventions of the wheel, masses of learning, personal challenges, but mostly growth. Through each and every one of my experiences, there has always been an opportunity for my growth. And no, dear listener, I didn't always appreciate or make the most of all of those opportunities. I'm human too, you know. There's something we all have in our favour as humans, though. We are wired to adapt, learn and achieve our potential. The challenge for we introverts is not compromising ourselves as we adapt. Well, that's been my experience anyway. Many of you will know that I sold out, and that's how it feels on reflection, as for far too long I behaved in more extroverted ways in an attempt to fit in and get on. It worked, but the cost was too great on my mental and physical health, so ultimately it was unsustainable. And it's not as though I didn't give it long enough. I compromised who I was for nearly 2 decades. So here's the thing about navigating extrovert settings. We can all, and yes, I do mean all, flex our behaviour in certain situations if it is important enough and we're motivated to do so. But we need to remember we're flexing for a specific reason and period of time, not changing who we are. The problem as I see it, and what causes the most angst and stress, occurs when we stick doggedly to either end of the spectrum. At one end we refuse to flex at all, I am who I am, and at the other end we lose all sense of ourselves and become someone we think we ought to be. Sadly, that's what far too much supposed feedback entices us to do, be someone they want us to be. So what I'm recommending here are the boundaries that keep us safe and the flexes that we can deploy for a specific reason. How much of this sounds familiar? Your workplace is geared up for hot desking in an open floor office. There are frequent brainstorming sessions, spontaneous meetings, and you're expected to collaborate constantly. If this sounds familiar, you'll be aware of the types of boundaries and practices you need in place. You'll already know about your need to pre-charge before the workday begins and recharge fully at the end of the day. I'd make sure you add into that routine top-up techniques using my brilliant battery boosters during your busy days. And if you don't already have these, you'll find the link to download them for free in the summary notes. Hot desking typically requires you to book a desk. So, and I know this is kind of obvious, make sure you book the right one, away from the really noisy areas and the most vociferous people. When you need to focus on particularly important or challenging work, book yourself sufficient time in a quiet pod or single office. It may be better that you work from home that day if your home office is conducive to great work. I know this is becoming increasingly difficult though, with the pressure on everyone to return to the office. And many organisations have downsized their accommodation, so not everyone can be in at the same time. With so much work being done over Teams or similar, many people now have headsets for their calls, and keeping these on even when you're not on a call can dull the interference from a busy office. And if you need to wear noise-cancelling headphones from time to time, do that. Some people worry this prevents the spontaneous learning opportunities, and I do understand the concern. However, if a manager or team leaders are relying on this as opposed to creating structured learning sessions, the learning will never be as robust or sticky. When you're invited to a meeting, make sure you ask for the detailed agenda well ahead of time so that you can prepare. This encourages the chair of the meeting to get into good habits, so it's not an unreasonable ask. Often the reason we miss our opportunity to contribute to a meeting is because we're expected to generate our ideas or share our answers instantaneously. That's not how our introverted brains work most of the time, unless, of course, the topic is a particular specialist area of ours. If you're currently applying for jobs, ask for the interview questions in advance. Most great organisations are now offering to do this, so if the organisation you're applying to won't, ask yourself if they're really a quality employer worthy of your talents. Now, okay, I accept needs must in some cases, and the job market is tough at the moment. But be mindful of the decision that you're making and create an actionable exit plan that will help you get into a better position. I think one of the most important things to do is to communicate your needs to your manager and colleagues. Honestly, it won't be a surprise to them, and they're probably wondering how to discuss this. Sadly, many managers feel too awkward to initiate conversations like this, which just shows how much management and leadership development is still needed. So the most important thing in an extroverted setting? Own your introverted strengths and play to them. And please, please, please don't apologise for your difference. If, like many of us, you're quieter not only in meetings but in general settings, use that to your advantage. Find how to articulate the benefits of listening more, which you do best by talking less. Share with people how taking the time to think through a problem enables you to apply a real solution rather than a sticking plaster quick fix. Make time to ask meaningful and relevant questions of your team so you build real psychological safety. In the workplace, as in other settings, we need to look after ourselves as introverts so we are able to demonstrate our natural skills and talents rather than being excluded because of the prevailing bias. If I move on now to social and family settings, and I'm deliberately covering these two together as I often find the pressures to be very similar. On the whole, for me, this is about managing expectations and being assertive where necessary. And remember, assertiveness is not being mean or nasty. It's about standing up for your rights and needs whilst respecting the rights and needs of others. Upholding our boundaries is also essential here, as I find those closest to us are often the ones who begrudge us our boundaries. You know, the old blood is thicker than water shaming routine. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. This is one I learned the hard way, as being around a family member who was a vulnerable narcissist and some of their tribe really tested my patience. The thing about being assertive with those who think they know you best and what is best for you is that it takes real intention. So the only place to start is by knowing at a visceral level what your rights and needs are, plus the boundaries that are important to you. And yes, I'll wheel out my favourite quote about boundaries because you can never hear this enough in my experience. I quote Tony Gaskin's with love here. He said, "You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, what you stop, and what you reinforce." The gaslighters and narcissists in your life will complain, try to make you wrong, and badmouth you to those they influence. As Mel Robbins is becoming known for these days, let them. But please balance this with let you. You have rights and needs, so establish what they are and stand full square behind them. These are the foundations on which your boundaries will hold fast, assertively empowering your growth, or will crumble in the face of adversity. It takes real skill to deal with a narcissist, and there are several things not to do, including don't argue or confront them, don't tell them what to do, don't expect them to see your point of view. This next one I find tough. Don't expect deep, meaningful communication, the type I crave, and don't go over past issues. These are gems and really worth remembering if you too are dealing with a narcissist. And I manage my own expectations around those social and family situations now. Naturally, I pre-charge before the event and schedule in recharging time afterwards. I stay as long as I am loving the vibe, and I leave when I feel my battery's draining. It's not rude or unsociable. It's me looking after my needs, which enables me to be the best version of myself. I am responsible for me just as other adults are responsible for themselves. They can have their own opinion of how I care for myself, because I know I'm enabling me to be happy and healthy in mind, body and soul. One thing I'm very serious about is being my word. If I say I will be somewhere, barring absolute disaster, I will be there, even if only for a short while. If I say I will do something, I will do it, and to the best of my ability. So my expectations of others, rightly or wrongly, are to show me the same courtesy. Don't accept or commit if you're not sure. I would rather manage knowing you're uncertain and support you in that than deal with the fallout of you not showing or not doing. I think that's fair, and this from a recovering people pleaser who hated to say no for far too long. I used to worry about what people thought of me if I said no. These days I mind less. I can't say I don't mind at all, but I'm getting better. I'm always work in progress. So in this episode, I've explored some of the challenges and options for navigating extrovert settings. And I'm still of the same opinion that I might as well have called this navigating life. And it will continue to feel like this until we make more headway in shifting the bias that favours extroverts. Heave ho! If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.